Batman is a character that faces constant reinvention. He's been a goofy grandpa, a James Bond super spy, a dark, brooding, gothic loner, a symbol who inspires an entire generation of heroes, and so much more. He's a character that means something different to every generation that's ever perceived him. When you ask someone to think of Batman, the image that pops into their head is going to be very different depending on who you ask. With so many different takes on what is Batman, how can you ever expect a studio to make a Batman movie that appeals to such a wide demographic of fans? Well, that's where the Batman Metanarrative comes in. So what are the common core components of Batman's setting? First, there's Gotham City, which can look something like this, or this. Sometimes it's a generic version of New York City or Chicago, and sometimes it has this dark, brooding, gothic energy, and sometimes it just looks like a gay circus on acid. Then there's the common enemies, which vary from generation to generation, but there are always commonalities and multiversal constants, like the Joker. While continuities like the Nolanverse might stray away from doing more sci-fi characters like Clayface or Mr. Freeze, pretty much any universe can do its own take on the Joker.
Why so serious?
And then there's the common allies. Commissioner Gordon, Alfred, Harvey Dent, you know the crew. For the most part, these characters only go through minor changes, but the way that Batman interacts with them in each film seems to build on and develop what came before it. In the Burton movies, Gordon just pointed Batman in the right direction. In the Nolan flicks, Gordon was Batman's only ally in the GCPD. And in the latest take on Batman, Gordon has this sort of begrudging relationship with Batman that's based in compromise. It's not quite as cooperative as the Nolan take, but that tension between them only serves to escalate the plot of the Gordon Batman meta-narrative further. Each iteration of Gordon takes on what came before and then moves it a step further.
Now I got you on assaulting an officer.
Got me on assaulting three. Hey! What's the matter with you? This isn't the way to do this.
You two now?
Let me handle this, Chief. Just give me a minute.
And that's just one branch of Batman's developing meta-narrative. And then there's the most common multiversal singularity for Batman, the origin. Parents and a broken child forever changed into something that's intended to prevent that same tragedy from occurring to others. And then there's also some variation from take to take. Some versions might make Catwoman an enemy, and some iterations might make her a lover and an ally. Some takes might feature Robin pretty prominently, and some takes might pretend he never existed just to appease their target demographic of low-intelligence film bros. Nolan bros. But every take features a few of these iconic bits of Batman's lore. And every new take on the franchise twists these knobs in slightly different directions, taking something old and making it feel new again, pushing the meta-narrative of Batman's story just a little bit further with each new take. Okay, so if you stuck around this long, hear me out for the next part, because this is where it gets really weird. You remember the Lego Batman movie? You remember this clip?
Sir, if you don't mind my saying, I'm a little concerned. I've seen you go through similar phases in 2016 and 2012 and 2008 and 2005 and 1997 and 1995 and 1992 and 1989 and that weird one in 1966. Do you want to talk about how you're feeling right now?
The idea is that Lego Batman isn't just Batman. Lego Batman is the idea of Batman. He's the meta Batman who's lived through the same meta narrative that we have. Does it matter that Lego Batman is a Robin origin story and Alfred mentions 2 movies that feature Robin? No, it doesn't. Versions of those stories happened without Robin in them. And that's all that your mind's eye really needs to know. Now, am I saying that all these different stories exist in the same canon? No, I'm saying not to think about continuity at all. Stop thinking about it.
Stop it. Get some help.
It doesn't matter.
It don't matter. None of this matters.
The idea is that even if the stories of those movies didn't play out exactly as we remember them, they still happened, or a version of them still happened. And that's all we really need to know as the audience. I think you could apply that same train of logic from the meta-narrative of Lego Batman to the DCEU iterations of Batman and Superman. I think that you could make the argument that they're both intended to be extensions of the characters from the Reeves Superman flicks and the Tim Burton Batman movies. And there are even a few cues to suggest that that might be the case. Just not in the places that fans are going to look for or appreciate. In Joss Whedon's Justice League, there are several points where the classic Reeves Superman theme plays. And likewise, Danny Elfman's theme from Batman 1989 makes a return as well. Whedon's version of Justice League seems to be very purposefully anachronistic. It could take place in the 2010s, or it could take place in the 2030s. It just has this kind of timeless feel, the same sort of vibe that the 89 Batman flick and 78 Superman flick had. You gotta think about who these guys are trying to sell tickets to, because it's not just superfans. The idea is that your grandmother could remember the 78 Superman flick or the 89 Batman flick, and maybe not remember the finer bits and details, but she would remember just enough of them to be able to project that meta Batman and meta Superman from her mind onto the versions of the characters in the new film. Your casual filmgoer doesn't spend all day on Twitter debating what is or isn't canon. They usually don't discuss these movies beyond,
"Wasn't that Batmobile scene cool? That Catwoman fine as fuck."
They usually don't even remember half of the movie 15 minutes after they leave the theater. Canon doesn't matter to your casual filmgoer, so therefore it doesn't really matter to the studios making the movies either. Watching the previous Snyder flicks doesn't necessarily make Superman's resurrection hit any harder. I mean, seriously, if you tried getting your grandma to watch either of those movies, she's just gonna get terribly, terribly confused. Why is Batman trying to hurt Superman? Aren't they supposed to be super friends?
Shut up, Grandma! Mama, take your prune juice!
If you wanted to get really pedantic, I'm sure there are plenty of reasons you couldn't just casually slide Batman 1989 next to Batman vs. Superman, and then say Batman vs. Superman is a direct sequel to the Burton movies. But none of that pedantic canon crap really matters to your grandma or the casual filmgoer at large. None of them care about canon, they just want to kill 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon. And that's all that the majority of the audience wants in general. Whedon's take on Justice League was a failed attempt to appeal to that demographic specifically, rather than the superfans like the Snyder movies had been. That movie wasn't for people who were going to keep talking about what they saw for months on end. It was for people who were just trying to kill 2 hours of time, because that's what the studio makes money off of, the casual filmgoer, not your pedantic Twitter debates. The nerds who really give a shit about canon are so much more of a minority amongst filmgoers than anyone online would have you believe. And that's another point that I really feel I need to get across. The people who are going to Comic-Con and arguing over canonicity aren't the majority of audiences that go to see these films. They might feed the hype, but their tickets were already sold the second the movie was announced. There's no need to sell a ticket to someone who's already bought into the franchise on a near religious level.
I always felt Batman was best suited in the role of gritty urban crime detective, but now you guys have him up against Santas and Easter bunnies? I'm sorry, but that's not my Batman.
It's the more casual audience that they're trying to draw in. Those are the people they have to convince to see the movie. I don't think the meta-narrative angle was Snyder's original intention with Batman vs. Superman or Justice League, but I do think it was the intention of Whedon and the studio to go in that direction. And it's probably one of the many reasons that he was cut out of the production of the film. Among, the other horrible, awful reasons, which the whole Snyder thing really deserves its own video. Maybe I'll get around to that one day. I think I got my point across, so let's move on.
What would there be to approve of? Eventually, probably soon, the world will recognize you for the pitiful disappointment you are. You are not worthy of my respect. You are simply bad product.
Would you be surprised to hear that the stories of David and Goliath and Noah's Ark are all found in 3 separate religious books? Those stories are in the Quran, the Torah, and the Bible. Sometimes the names are changed around, and sometimes they're told in different orders, and sometimes the events occurred slightly differently, or the morals or lessons are changed around, but those same stories and ideas occur across all 3 separate religions. And it seems like every small town has the same wandering hitchhiker story, an urban legend where you pick up someone on the side of the road, and by the time you reach their destination, the hitchhiker disappears. Every small town has that story, including my own. And in that same vein, all across the globe, different cultures all have their own version of the Cinderella story. And it's all basically the same story, but with different cultural set dressings. These stories were passed around for thousands of years before ever being recorded or written down in any way, shape, or form. Just like a game of telephone, every story changed slightly over time depending on the person who was retelling it. And in that same way, the meta-narrative of Batman evolves. And just like Batman or Superman, the basic ideas of these timeless stories never change regardless of how many times they're retold. Great Flood, Insurmountable Odds, People Who Won't Listen. Doomed Planet, Desperate Scientist, Insurmountable Odds, Last Hope, Kindly Couple. Slain Parents, Desperate Son, Insurmountable Odds, and A Quest for Vengeance. Or for justice, depending on who you ask. There's a new trend of modern sequels ignoring the sequels of the past, like how the newest Halloween trilogy ignores Halloween 2 and everything that came after it. And Terminator, Alien, Predator, and Jurassic World all treat canon in that same way. They only really acknowledge the most important details from the first movies that people would remember. They don't waste time on the sequels that blur into the background of people's memories. So it really doesn't matter if Grandma saw Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman, because she still remembers the Reeves flicks and the Burton ones, and that's all that really mattered when she went to go see Justice League in the theaters. But I think that's the studio's intention. But why is that? I think it's because you, and by you I mean we, as in the people who would go out of their time to watch a video essay about comic books, I don't think that we are always the target demographic for the things that we enjoy so passionately. And that's okay. I kinda like living in a world where my crazy uncle goes on rants about QAnon instead of rants about why Zack Snyder's Justice League should be given another chance. Canon doesn't really matter to your average audience member, and it doesn't matter to your casual friends who only watch the movie. It doesn't even matter to the studios who make these movies. So, why does canon matter to you? What I'm saying is, learn to stop worrying about canon, and embrace the meta-narrative bomb. Because Batman movies aren't about Batman. Or at the very least, they're not intended to be adaptations of the comic book character Batman. No, instead, they're about the idea of Batman. But what is meta-narrative, and who is the meta-Batman? I know I've repeated those ideas a lot in this video. It's the Batman as he exists in our minds and in the public consciousness. The meta-Batman is our Batman, whichever Batman that is to you. The meta-Batman is the idea of Batman. It's Batman as he exists in our minds and in our consciousness. And that's an idea I plan on exploring in the future. Going back to the origins of Batman and how Batman is actually an amalgamation of different characters and tropes from his era, and how Batman became an archetype of his own, as well as how the idea of Batman began. So if you're interested in hearing that, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe with the notification bell on to see the next video. And if you're interested in more ComicTube content in general, you can always go check out our ComicTube, where we post some of our favorite ComicTube videos. And as always, I'd like to thank my lovely supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to see more Super Swim Team 7 content, you can check out these videos here. So with all that being said, I've been Swim Team Captain 7 of Super Swim Team 7, signing off.